On behalf of our firm, I'd like to thank you to all of our partners here in the financial services industry. We wanted to have a nice, small, tight gathering of really respectful folks, and just know that there are so many more of your teammates and colleagues that are, work with us back at your offices, and we sincerely appreciate that. We differentiate ourselves in a lot of different ways. We differentiate ourselves with our execution. Any great organization has two things. They have teamwork and they have great people, and we're blessed to have both of those at Michelin. But it's not lost on anybody in this room, especially if you work in New York City during 9/11, that this is the 20th anniversary of 9/11. And I want to take a moment to honor those that we lost that day, and honor our first responders and our armed forces of this great United States of America. I'm going to shorten up these introductions because they could go on forever. And now to our geopolitical SIT rep. So both of the men up here wouldn't need any introduction to most of the people in this room, and yet it's my privilege and distinct honor to introduce them to you in advance of this interesting fireside chat. I'm going to start in order of military rank, and thank former National Security Advisor, Lieutenant General H.R. McMaster, who I first became friends with when we attended the U.S. Military Academy, and who served as a special advisor to Michelin since last year. Thank you for coming across the United States to be with us, sir. It would be an understatement to say that nearly every current and former government leader around the world, and every current and former military commander in the world's 195 countries, and thousands of diplomats around the world, and academics didn't know who General McMaster is. They know him as a decorated war hero, a combat veteran whose leadership roles in the Gulf War, Operation Enduring Freedom, Operation Iraqi Freedom, not only accomplished the military's intent to those respective missions, his leadership inspired countless numbers of troops and those of our allies. They know General McMaster as a gifted student of both military and world history, and someone whose knowledge and insight with respect to geopolitics has led to his being appointed to the country's 26th National Security Advisor. I could go on all evening about General McMaster and his accomplishments, and I would encourage everyone to read about this amazing servant leader and my friend. General McMaster, thank you. And next, for those of you who do not yet know David McCormick, you should, as he is fast becoming an industry icon. He oversees a firm of 1,500 employees in his role as Chief Executive Officer of Bridgewater Associates. Like General McMaster, he graduated from the United States Military Academy at West Point. He's a decorated Gulf War combat veteran, and he's an accomplished author in his own right. Dave is the epitome of a scholar, athlete, and warrior. He lettered 4 years at West Point in wrestling. He served in the 82nd Airborne as an engineer captain, including leadership in Operation Desert Storm. When Dave returned home, he went to Princeton, and he got his PhD in Princeton University School of Public and International Affairs, and he became a consultant to McKinsey. He worked as the CEO of 2 publicly traded software companies, and then he went back to serve his country. He worked in government service, first as Deputy National Security Advisor for International Economic Policy during the time he was the country's principal representative to the G8, and thereafter he was appointed by President Bush, and he was the Undersecretary for the Treasury International Affairs during one of our most challenging times. He was named co-CEO, I think about 2 years ago. He's the yin to Ray Dalio Zhang. He was appointed CEO this year, and he called, I think it was a cold call to General McMaster, because General McMaster was asking for money over in Afghanistan. But with that, I will turn it over to these two gentlemen to debate and to dialogue, and we thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. I had no idea you were so impressive.
He knows better. He knows better. Thanks, Dean.
Yeah, thank you for that introduction. So I have the privilege, and people who know me know that I'm not prone to hyperbole, but I will say that not only is HR a great friend, but just one of the great American heroes and patriots of our generation. And so I'm so glad to be with you today. And I've had a chance to sort of see that from lots of different angles. When HR was in the military and or was in Iraq, and I was in the Treasury, and then when HR was in the White House and my wife was his deputy. And so I got a window into HR's leadership, and really remarkable, really a remarkable leader. So HR, we talk all the time, so I know what's on your mind regarding this, but I think to share with the audience Afghanistan, and start with that because it's so personal to many of us, and I know you've been very involved in trying to help get people out. Talk about what's happened most recently, and put that in context of 20 years and great power competition.
All right. Thanks, Dave. Well, it's a pleasure to be with you, Dave. I just got to tell you one thing you don't know about Dave McCormick. I did call him when I was a colonel, given the mission of assessing the entire Iraqi government and what's wrong with it, right? So I'm like, how the hell do I do that, right?
Where to begin?
And so I called him for advice and assistance. And this random colonel calls him, immediately sent the former Treasury attaché and a team to help me do that, And so it just tells you the kind of guy that Dave McCormick is. A lot of people would have come up with all sorts of bureaucratic reasons to not help you in those circumstances. So, it's a pleasure to be with you, and thanks for Bishler and Dean and the great team there for this opportunity to be with all of you. I think that what we have seen in Afghanistan is a catastrophe, right? And I think we just have to acknowledge it as the first step in being able to begin to mitigate this catastrophe. It's a catastrophe, I think, in three ways. It's a humanitarian catastrophe of colossal scale that is only just now beginning, right? And what we are recognizing is that humanitarian catastrophe that we're going to be witness to, and have decided not to exert any agency really to prevent, is also going to continue to resonate into a political catastrophe, in connection especially with how we are regarded by our friends, right? And also how we are regarded by our enemies. Many of our friends now feel abandoned, right? I mean, Donald Trump was an offensive guy, believe me, right? And I know, at times. But remember how up in arms everybody was about mean tweets from Donald Trump against our allies? Well, we didn't abandon any of their citizens and leave them behind in what is now going to morph into really a sustained hostage crisis in Afghanistan. And so that's angering a lot of our allies and disappointing, really our best friends. And then, of course, I think it's going to embolden our enemies and adversaries. It's already doing so. I mean, if you can stomach reading the China Daily, right? You see how the Chinese Communist Party has responded, by saying to Taiwan, do you really think, the Americans are going to be there for you? So I think that it will encourage a whole range of hedging behavior among other partners around the world who will feel as if they can't really rely on our support in the way maybe they used to assume that they could. And then I think this political catastrophe and humanitarian catastrophe are both connected to a real problem in the area of security, and a situation is going to make us much more vulnerable. And we're going to be much more vulnerable because we know, right? We know from September 11th, 2001, that these terrorist organizations, when they gain control of territory and populations and resources and enjoy a safe haven, they become orders of magnitude more dangerous. And this is what we're going to see, as well as the strain that the refugee crisis puts on neighboring countries and then ultimately Europe as well, much like the Syrian civil war. And the first country that's going to be destabilized is Pakistan, which helped create this catastrophe and will in many ways reap the whirlwind of it. But that's a problem, right? Because just the size of Pakistan, but also because it's a nuclear-armed country. And I don't think it's too much of a stretch to begin to imagine jihadist terrorist organizations in this ecosystem, right, that houses about 20 of them, that they could gain control and access to the most destructive weapons on Earth. So we have these three catastrophes to deal with, but we're still in denial. We're still pretending that it's not a big deal, that you can surrender to a terrorist organization, which is what we did in the capitulation agreement of February 2020, without consequence. And so I think the first kind of order of business for us is to stop deluding ourselves. Stop deluding ourselves about the nature of our enemy.
But I want to ask you a hard question before we turn to other topics, which is, you were there and then you left. But if you had a do-over right now, if you could redo the last year, recognizing the political realities which the American public does not want to be, in Afghanistan, at least in mass.
Yeah.
What would you have done differently? What would a good outcome have looked like?
Right. I think a good outcome was what we had in August of 2017. And I think this has been kind of lost in sort of the watching this catastrophe unfold. Remember, then candidate Trump had said, hey, we need to get out of Afghanistan, right? And what you typically hear is it's a mantra now. We've wasted trillions of dollars, right? There's nothing positive has happened in Afghanistan. Well, I mean, now we're kind of realizing there has been some positive developments because we're seeing people lose all the gains that were made since 2001. But he was determined to pull out, right? To end the endless wars, right? Another mantra and bumper sticker. Well, what we did in that period of time, and Dina helped me tremendously, Dave's wife helped me tremendously, is we decided we had to give the president best analysis, best advice, even though it cut against his predilections. And the way for us to do that was to present him with multiple options for South Asia broadly and Afghanistan in particular, and then to examine what are the costs and consequences of each of these courses of action. And when we did that, and I got kind of chewed up in the process, and I was at peace with that, we presented these options to him at Camp David, and we began with the withdrawal option. Okay, here's the withdrawal option, here's what it looks like. And he came to the conclusion that it was in our interest and best for the country for us to sustain a small commitment that enabled Afghans to bear the brunt of the fight against the enemies of all humanity, rather than to disengage and to see the reestablishment of the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan and a return of safe haven and support bases to. So what did that look like? It looked like 2018 when we made some major changes, different approach to Pakistan, right? Not letting Pakistan have it both ways anymore. We took the timeline off because can anybody tell me how it works? You say it, hey, we're leaving on this schedule, and by the way, let's negotiate, an agreement favorable to us, right? It doesn't work, and war is really still a contest of wills. And then we also, besides taking the timeline off, we actually said the Taliban is an enemy. Under the Obama administration and under the initial negotiation efforts with the Taliban, they said the Taliban's not a designated enemy. We couldn't pursue them actively anymore.
Yeah.
And we started to inflict tremendous losses on them in this period of time, and then it was all reversed.
But your point is that small force would have been imminently sustainable.
Absolutely.
Lots of places a small force, and when you think about what we expended, what did we learn at West Point first thing around? If you get a strategic asset like Bagram, that's something you're not going to give up. You're not going to give up quickly. The irony of what's happening in Afghanistan is the thing that you've written about extensively and talked about in the National Security Strategy in 2017 was really about the big threat, which was the rise of China, and how that would play out and how we needed to reorient ourselves. Talk a little bit about China and how you see that contest of wills playing out.
Okay, great. And I'm going to ask you a question about the economic dimension of the competition, financial aspect, if you don't mind. So this was, I think, the biggest shift in U.S. foreign policy since the end of the Cold War, the shift in foreign policy toward China under the Trump administration. And what we essentially did to affect that shift is to make implicit assumptions that had underpinned our previous approach to China, and especially the assumption that China, having been welcomed into the international economic order, would play by the rules, would as it prospered, liberalize its economy and ultimately liberalize its form of government. And of course, this didn't happen. It didn't happen, we concluded, because the Chinese Communist Party is driven by emotion, aspiration, and ideology, right? And the main emotion is one of fear of the party's losing its exclusive grip on power, and that's tied to the ambition and the narrative of national rejuvenation, right? To set and meet rising expectations of the population while perfecting a technologically enabled Orwellian police state, and then engaging in a very sophisticated strategy, which I describe in the book as one of co-option, coercion, and concealment, to gain a position of preponderant advantage and an exclusionary area of primacy across the Indo-Pacific, and then to challenge the United States globally from a geoeconomic perspective, and to rewrite the rules of the international order in a way that favors China and disadvantages our free and open societies and our free market economic systems. So what did we have to do what did we determine that we had to do? Well, first we had to defend ourselves against this very pernicious form of aggression, economic aggression, as well as cyber espionage, for example, industrial espionage. But we also had to have an offensive aspect to this, which was strengthening alliances and strengthening cooperative efforts across the free world to confront China's aggressive behavior, economically as well as militarily, and then also to help maintain and grow our competitive advantages. And you see a lot of this playing out now, I think, in the form of legislation, and in what is, I think, a remarkable continuity between the Biden administration and the Trump administration on this particular topic. I do think the most consequential aspect of this competition is economic and financial at this stage. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, because I do think this is an area that we've been slow to realize. I think corporate America is waking up to that competition and is open to the kind of public and private sector cooperation that's necessary for us to compete more effectively. But I think maybe, on Wall Street in particular, some people haven't gotten the memo on this. Yeah. And in many ways, we're underwriting our own demise. And I mean, I could expound on that if you'd like, but I'd love to. You're the expert.
Well, I'll say a minute on, and then draw you up more. But I think the thing that you said in the national security strategy, the national security strategy that came out in 2017 was really one of the finest national security strategies written in modern times, but one of the best documents that came out of the Trump administration, and it essentially said economic security is national security. That was the recognition, and a lot of the strategy was focused on that. And as you and I have talked about, I believe that most of what needs to happen for our competition with China, the great power competition, is what we do at home. So in other words, there was a naive view. There were multiple administrations that had that naive view that if we opened ourselves up to China and encouraged China to adopt free market principles, that they would do so because it was in their best interest, and that proved to be naive. And China's technological focus in particular has now created more parity. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's going to require us to have an entire agenda of economic renewal that will put us in a much more competitive spot vis-a-vis China, with technology, with focus, with a number of things that are going to need to change in terms of our R&D investment and lots of other things. And I also think that the rules of the game are changing in markets. And you've talked about a Hippocratic Oath, which is something that I think business leaders are wrestling with. Yeah. And I think it's across the board. And we've talked about different companies and how you participate in that. And the conundrum is twofold, which is if you're an investor or if you're a company, China is the biggest market in the world, and if you're an investor, it's one of the biggest global markets in the world. At the same time, it's hugely unpredictable because of the policies that are now taking place on both sides, right? So it's not just the capital controls and things that happen on the Chinese side; it's what's happening on our own side. So putting aside the Hippocratic Oath dimension of this, which I want to talk about, there's just an uncertainty about investing in those markets that is only likely to grow as the competition grows.
Right. Can I ask you a follow-up question here? Dave's written, I think, a really excellent piece on economic statecraft in the Texas National Security Review. If you want to look, it's worth looking up and reading. And I did an interview with him, a video and a podcast on that topic at Hoover. There is sort of a new enthusiasm, right, for really, industrial policy essentially, right? And there are probably 10 bills now, working their way through Congress, from the Endless Frontier Act to the Strategic Competition Act, to the aspect of that having to do with the chips and the CHIPS Act and the 5G communications, and then also the supply chain assessments and the move to try to use government policy to shift supply chains more toward resiliency, right, and away from efficiency as the only criterion. So how do you think about, what's a framework that we can think about?
Well, in this interview, it's at Hoover, and HR said, and I was advocating this, and I've been a free markets person, a free markets Republican my whole life, and HR said, what would Milton Friedman say about this, of course, coming from Hoover? And I said, well, I'm not sure what Milton Friedman would say, but Milton Friedman wasn't trying to compete and win against the Chinese, who have a completely different model. And how you balance these two things is really a question, because on one hand, we have inadequate dollars, an inadequate partnership between the private sector and the public sector driving these new technologies, their application within our national security arena, but also more broadly in our society. The amount of money, how that capital flows, The R&D, the general R&D is orders of magnitude bigger in China. So how do you compete with that while at the same time not undermining the competitive dynamics of our market economy, which has made it so resilient, so dynamic, and so forth? And so the short answer in one sentence is you have to find ways to very subtly and in a very targeted way tip the scales to our advantage without undermining the free market dynamics that have made us great, and at the same time not falling prey to the politics and the cronyism that hijacks government spending. And that's a delicate balancing act, but I think we have to test fundamental assumptions because in many ways we're losing. If you look at, and you know this well, 2025 plan for China from 10, 15 years ago, they've done everything they said they were going to do, and we're losing ground. And so we got to change direction a bit. Absolutely. Tell me about the Hippocratic Oath.
Okay, so all of you should comment on this because I really I hope this is not naive. Like washed up generals, man, should not talk about economics and finances, But
I'm just getting started. I've got the next thing is the pink flamingo.
Every time I talk to Dave, I say, hey, does this count for college credit, man? You're teaching me here. But I think about these decisions, right, on whether to invest in China or whether to accept Chinese investments in our companies. Any kind of form of economic discourse ought to meet sort of a test that I think directors should bring to board discussions that I think fall under ESG. Actually, I think these I think genocide should maybe be like an ESG topic. I don't know, but I think the three elements of this first do no harm approach to economic discourse with China would be first, don't help the Chinese Communist Party gain a differential advantage over our military or an unfair economic advantage in the area of the emerging data-driven global economy or in advanced manufacturing. The second, and that's that occurs through the transfer of technology. It includes using U.S. pensioners' money, right, to finance the companies that are building next-generation aircraft and ships and missiles for them. It's kind of crazy. The second aspect of this would be not to assist the Chinese Communist Party in perfecting its technologically enabled Orwellian police state, right? I don't invest in Chinese AI companies, maybe for example, and the third, or benefit from slave labor in Xinjiang, for example, and then the third would be don't compromise, and this is where really I don't have the expertise, but don't compromise the viability of your company in exchange for the lure of short-term profits, and this is the model of to get access to the lucrative Chinese market that you because of the joint venture law you enter into agreements with Chinese companies which have to act by law as an arm of the Chinese Communist Party. You transfer your technology, you transfer your know-how, and then what the party does is they replicate that in a Chinese company that they subsidize. They slowly close down your market share in China, manufacture those goods at artificially low prices, dump them on the international market, and drive you out of business, right? And this is what happened with so many examples, right? Look at GE's experience in China. Look at what's occurred with solar panel manufacturing or wind turbines. Look at what's about to happen with battery manufacturing, or how about electric cars? Hey Tesla, man, I'm going to tell Elon Musk, hey man. So few people have been through this program already. So I think that those ought to be maybe the criteria, and then maybe I don't know, Dave. Can the lure of the Chinese market be compensated for by developing other markets in Asia, for example, right? And anyway, is that a useful way to think about it? Do you think? And what?
Yeah, no. Well, I think it's a broader thing where companies are having to think about their investment profiles more broadly, and there's all sorts of factors that are now being considered, and where you draw those lines is a debate that's happening across boredom. So I do think it's a real challenge, and if from an investment perspective, most big investors have some exposure, so there's a question of how to think about it. No, it's a challenging issue, and as I said, the policy landscape's changing on our side too, as you said, with pensioners and so forth. Talk about, if you would, take your general hat off and put your investor hat on, right? So this is dangerous territory, but
it's kind of a dunce cap. Man. I don't know.
Tell me how when you look at the global landscape, and you think about black swans, which definitionally you can't see, or pink flamingos, which you talk about, which you also definitionally can't see. Describe how you would think about that if you're people that are allocating capital and thinking about risk.
You mean just globally?
Yeah.
Just various. Yeah, I think a lot of what we think are baby black swans are pink flamingos, right? Because they are more predictable than you think. You know, I think that I think one of it's China, right? I think the party's going to become more restrictive. You're already seeing it now, right? The degree to which the party is now involved in every tech company, the kind of from the DDIPO to so many other actions they're taking against the tech sector. Jack Ma's disappearance. But I think this is going to a trend that will continue, right? The party and Xi Jinping are determined, right, to tighten their grip on power, right? Celebrities disappearing off the internet and any kind of social media and physically as well. So I think that's a trend that's going to continue, and I don't think geostrategic risk is factored into our investment decisions yet, and into the market yet in connection with China. I think the other big aspect is, hey, what are the...
Can I ask you one question on
sure.
that? Do you see, people talk about Taiwan as an example, and the notion that there could be, a big disruptive move on Taiwan. Right. When you think about disruptive, it's been a 20-year march of incrementalism. Do you see disruptive potential?
I do, and not only in Taiwan, but also in the South China Sea. And I think that Taiwan will be a flashpoint, especially for those of you who are going to try to time this, is after 2022, after the Winter Olympics, which I think the Chinese are going to try to at least not cross the line in a brazen way before the Winter Olympics. And then also after the Chinese Communist Party Congress in 2022, when Xi Jinping will essentially be kind of coronated as the next Mao Zedong and leader for life, chairman for life, and will feel pressure, self-generated pressure, based on his promises to make China whole again. And I think that's when the threat really kind of goes through the roof, and I think that there's a danger of the People's Liberation Army, as well. I mean, believing their own propaganda.
And the scale of 1 to 10. With 10 being really ready and 1 being not ready at all, how ready is our military, America's military, for the possibilities?
Yeah.
No predictions, just the possibilities.
I think I would give, 6. And that's scary, right? You don't want to go to war at a 6. And I think there are a number of reasons for that. One of the reasons, though, is complacency, right? And this belief that we could be dominant because of our technological military prowess and the big gap that we had in our ability, especially to conduct joint operations, integrated air, land, sea, space, cyber capabilities. Well, 2 things have happened. The Chinese have caught up in many of those areas, but they've developed asymmetric capabilities, right? I mean, there are 2 ways to fight wars, right?
Yeah.
Asymmetrically and stupidly. You hope your enemy picks stupidly like Saddam did in 91.
Right.
But the Chinese are trying to take apart what they see as our differential advantages, right? Electronic warfare, counter space capabilities, tiered and layered air defense, long-range missile capabilities, drones, underwater drones. And so, this range of capabilities is challenging to us because they're meant to break apart what we kind of banked on, in terms of our differential advantage.
It's both a shrinking pie and then the allocation of the pie to new platforms and modernization.
Yes.
It's disproportionate.
And I will just say too, though, we're investing more and more in fewer and fewer more exquisite systems, and those are the systems that are prone to catastrophic failure if they confront these kind of disruptive technologies, right? So I think our whole approach to modernization is a bit off as well, and then I think the approach we're kind of taking that makes it dangerous is we're talking loudly,
right?
But our stick's getting smaller. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? I think. I think that that we do need more and smarter defense.
Well, on talking loudly, I mean, one of the things I want to ask you about is American politics, and just the degree of polarization that we're seeing in our public discourse. Put aside anybody's party affiliation, we have extremes on both sides, and it seems like it's making it harder and harder to find common ground and get things done.
Yeah.
So what's the attribution in your mind, and what are your thoughts?
Well, I write about this in the conclusion of the book, and then I wrote more about this in the afterword that comes out in the paperback on Sunday. So
just want to throw that in there.
No, I was just saying. I'm sorry, I'm not plugging my book.
No, are you kidding me?
I mean, Dean
Dean
already bought it for you. So this isn't the right audience to pitch.
Dina loves him so much she probably bought 100 of them for me.
So it's really, I've been thinking a lot about it and trying to understand it better. I think this goes back to transitions in the global economy in the 90s, and especially after China's accession to the WTO in 2001. when large segments of the American population were left behind by that transition. It was magnified, I think, by some strategic shocks. I mean, 9/11, but especially, I think, the unanticipated length and difficulties of the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, and then by the financial crisis, 2008, 2009, when I think large numbers of Americans lost faith in the elites, lost faith in the system, and felt left behind. Okay, add an opioid, epidemic on top of that, right? And I think that this sort of discontent and sense of disenfranchisement in this period of time set conditions for the extreme polarization we're seeing now. Now, add into that a new information environment, right? Where the business models for the fourth estate, mainstream media, encourage them to be more partisan, right? To double down on loyal audiences, such that if you lean to the left a little bit, you watch one of two cable stations. You lean to the right, you watch one cable news station. Now add on to that the avarice of our social media companies and the algorithms that drive us more and more apart from each other. Hey, you like this extreme content about some kind of crazy, conspiracy theory about stealing the election or whatever? Hey, let me show you a few more of those. Let me show you a few more of these anti-vax, or whatever it is. And this is driving us apart from each other. And now add on to that, and there's a great essay in The Economist this week on this, how these reified theories, these reified philosophies that were only prominent in academia a few years ago, associated with critical theory, critical race theory being a subcomponent of that, and identity politics on one extreme, that now interact with bigotry and racism, and that accelerate more of these triple forces that are spinning us apart from each other. And the sense that you can't even empathize with people anymore. And you can't even say what you think because you might say the wrong thing, and then somebody's going to be offended, and kind of the safety culture and everything. I mean, it's terrible, right? All of these factors are part of, I think, our diminished confidence in who we are as a people, our common identities as Americans, and in our democratic institutions and processes. And so what I argue for in the book, what I'm trying to do to make a small contribution toward the work that I'm doing, is to bring Americans back together and to correct really this lack of confidence. Richard Rorty, a philosopher who was no right-winger, man. I mean, he said that pride is to nations as self-respect is to individuals, a necessary ingredient for self-improvement. And I think Americans don't understand our history. We don't take a moment to celebrate what we have, right? I mean, we have rule of law. We don't have complete equality of opportunity, but we are pretty good at this, and we have to get better at it. We have to remove barriers to the great promise of America based on what zip code people are born in, and improve education and so forth. But we have freedom of speech. We have freedom of the press, right? And we don't celebrate that. Our founders said that our republic would require constant nurturing. Okay, let's nurture it.
I want to ask you a related question about the description you just gave of polarization and those extremes, which is, and it's related, I'm not sure if it's cause or effect, but the Pew data well, which is that Americans have lost faith in their institutions, lost faith in their churches, they've lost faith in their public officials, they've lost faith in their business leaders, and more recently, they've started to lose faith in their military leadership.
Yeah.
So how do we address that gap in leadership, both in confidence and in reality?
Yeah, I mean, what you just described is a recipe for nihilism, and like kind of a Nietzschean, God is dead moment without any faith also in our secular institutions, right? And I think, I'd love to hear what everybody else thinks too, what you think about this. So I'm just going to ask you to please give us your thoughts on this. I think it has to happen from the bottom up. I don't think we can wait for politicians in Washington to do it. And so I think that it happens in communities, in Boys and Girls Clubs, in civic organizations, and various clubs and so forth, who work together to strengthen their communities. I'm trying to do it in a little piece of Stanford University, and whenever I get a chance to do it, to begin to restore confidence and to begin to work on really concrete problems. I think the problem with our political leaders is they've become performative rather than formative, and it seems like they're always on a stage trying to score points against the other rather than working together. So I don't know, Dave. I really, I served in the Army for 34 years, and that was my venue for serving, right? And I thought, okay, now I'm just watching this, and I thought, like during COVID, when COVID became really polarized,
right.
And I thought, you know, this is really terrible. And then a friend of mine, who's here in New York, he said, well, why don't you do something about it? So, okay. So we formed a task force to study COVID, to prepare for the next pandemic, to come up with real lessons. And I think it's going to stand the test of time. But we made a small contribution to, you know, in that area. And then I'm trying to do other things as well but I think all of us have a piece in this. I mean, what do you?
I agree with you. I mean, I think there's a sense of perspective. First of all, the perspective of America's greatness and also its true challenges and weaknesses and an ability to balance those things as well. But there's also an historical perspective. You know, I remember, I've been working on this a bit for that project we've talked about. But in 1979,
absolutely
right? 1979. If you put a snapshot of 1979 versus today. Economic stagflation, the Iran Desert One, malaise, the energy crisis, the challenges, and lack of confidence in our leaders. And then literally when I was a sort of a plebe or a first year or two at West Point, you saw Morning in America, where the economy turned around, the military was back on its front leg, America sort of got its a snap back into its step. And that's been always the case through American history. These periods, if there's renewed leadership, can be followed by great. So first of all, there's the historical perspective, and then second, I totally agree with you. If you look at where the answer lies, the answer doesn't lie in some single person or some great figure. It lies in the de Tocqueville vision of America, what he experienced in town halls and in the American fabric, and what many of us experienced in the military. I think the military, and where, how many times in your military life, yours was much longer than mine, but how many times did you really know whether somebody was a Republican or a Democrat, or what religion they were? I mean, it was basically, they came together in support of a common purpose, which was to keep their unit safe and to be part of something bigger than themselves. And I think the answer for addressing our challenges lies in those micro leadership, micro experiences.
Right, I agree, and I have a Clinton quotation comes to mind about the 1970s, and by Clinton, I mean George Clinton of Parliament.
You were throwing me for a loop there.
Parliament Funkadelic. Okay, so in 1972, the America Eats Its Young album came out, right? And then this is a period of malaise and everything else. Remember the malaise speech? Carter didn't use malaise, but that decade, as you just mentioned, was a rough decade. And I think what's missing these days is people sometimes don't feel like they have a sense of agency, but we do have agency. And one of the tracks on that album was, if you don't like the effect, don't produce the cause. And I think maybe we ought to take a lesson from from Funkadelic, man, from George Clinton.
So that's another thing you don't know about HR. He in my mind is the greatest national security advisor in modern history, but he is undeniably the one with the best sense of funk. So, what was the speech you gave? We know about you wrote a speech about the sort of the funk.
I gave a speech about the importance of rhythm to foreign policy and national security. And just used music as a metaphor through the whole thing, and then requested that those in attendance refer to me as General Funkenstein. And I'll tell you, man, George Clinton. I'll tell you, those albums back then. Very positive lyrics about agency, about coming together, right? One Nation Under a Groove, right? Which was the next album after America Eats Its Young.
So I don't know if the audience has questions. I'll ask you one more while I'm collecting, which is, tomorrow you are being appropriately honored as a distinguished graduate of West Point, and I can't think of anybody who's more worthy of that honor. And my understanding is you have an opportunity to give a few remarks, and I'd love to know what you're going to say in a nutshell. What are you going to share to the cadets and future leaders? And I know we have not only military officers in the audience, but parents of military officers in the audience. So what's on your mind?
Well, I mean, obviously, I don't feel deserving of that kind of recognition at all, and so it'll be a message of gratitude, and I would like to highlight just the tremendous rewards associated with service. And rewards that I think are less tangible and not apparent to many people, right? I mean, all the hardships associated with military service are apparent to everybody, right? Long time away from family, in dangerous places. Sometimes you get blown up or wounded, and you see friends who you care about and love dearly lose their lives in combat. And so there are difficult memories and hardships in combat, but the less tangible rewards of service are tremendous. And you mentioned them already, Dave. You got it already. I mean, it's really being part of something bigger than yourself, making a real difference in real people's lives. And I think what Americans don't realize enough is that our warriors are both warriors and humanitarians, right? When you see what happened in Kabul after we disengaged, what happened in Afghanistan, you saw that we were actually operating on the frontier, a modern day frontier, between barbarism and civilization. And we had created so many opportunities that people otherwise would not have had, and lifted kind of the Afghan people out of this hell of Taliban rule from 96 to 2001.
I want to switch to climate change and talk about climate change as a national security priority. How do you see that playing out within the context of geopolitical risk?
Yeah, I think that we're missing opportunities in the area of climate change, because we look at problem sets that are interconnected, but we only look at one discrete aspect of it. So, for example, man-made carbon emissions. But we have to look, I think, at carbon emissions and global warming as connected to energy security, as connected to health security, water security, environmental concerns. And when you suboptimize for any one of those, right, you create other issues, right? That's one aspect of it. So, we can't. I think you can have it. You can have solutions that get and improve energy security and also get a reduction in carbon emissions. So, what kind of strategies are we missing? I think because of ideological reasons. We're not talking about enough to conversion off of coal into natural gas as a bridge, and then ultimately conversion to hydrogen. But hydrogen has to be coupled with nuclear, really, to be effective. And we're not even having a discussion about next generation nuclear power, which already is at a maturity level that we can be doing it right now. These modular next generation plants that create waste that's very short half-life and so forth. And of course, we also don't address the international dimension.
That's what I was going to ask you. I mean, of course, the critics would say whatever we do, it doesn't matter unless China and India get with the program.
It's absolutely true. That's true, right? We won't gain anything if we go to carbon zero, right? Mm-hmm. If China keeps building and financing 50 to 70 coal-fired plants a year, which is what they're doing internationally, and each one of those plants burns a ton of coal every 2 minutes, and so that's one of the biggest problems we have.
I'm going to switch topics. Semiconductors. I want to talk about semiconductors for a minute because there's sort of three things. One, obviously, it has huge implications for markets. Yeah. Two, it has huge implications for national security. But talk about the strategic conundrum. Like, it's almost unfathomable, if I'm understanding it right, that the most sophisticated semiconductors in the world that are necessary for so much of our national security apparatus are manufactured in Taiwan, and are the sole provider for both China and us. Is that a fair description?
Absolutely. This is TSMC, obviously.
And how did we get there? Yeah. And what are the implications?
I think complacency. I'd like to hear what you think the remedy is too, beyond what we're doing already. But I think it's complacency associated with assumptions we made in the wake of the end of the Cold War, the breakup of the Soviet Union, the lopsided victory in Desert Storm, right? We were jubilant, right? We had reason to be jubilant, right? But we assumed that the arc of history had guaranteed the primacy of our free and open societies over closed authoritarian systems. We believed that, hey, great power competition, that's a relic of the past, right? And then our security is going to be guaranteed, right? Because of our technological military prowess. And I think it was because of complacency that we created these dependencies. I think some bad business decisions too. I don't know, I'm not an expert on chips or chips manufacturing, but I think whenever you separate designing from manufacturing, aren't you giving up a lot of synergies and ability to innovate, by that kind of constant feedback? And even if you can produce them cheaper, in a fab in Taiwan or whatever. So I think some in retrospect, bad business decisions, which are now being reversed with Intel's acquisition of a fab company. TSMC is constructing the plant in
Arizona,
Phoenix. So, but we're in a race to catch up. It takes 4 years to build those plants. Will we be able to do it in time? We already have a huge chip shortage, as you know. So I think it's going to take really international cooperation, which is kind of growing between the companies here.
To tie back to our previous conversation, I think this is where free market orthodoxy and complacency overtook sort of national security. And it's a perfect example where I think there will have to be interventions.
Right.
either through some form of industrial policy or innovation policy to create the right national security industrial base in semiconductors and other things.
Right.
And that's the sort of the push and the pull that we've seen over the last 20 years in terms of how to think about it.
Would you just comment on, like, do you think what we're doing now is adequate? What more should we do? Okay.
We should
on chips in particular, but also supply chain resilience and
I think I think I'm going to mention this. I'm doing a piece of work with the Reagan Institute with Maryland Houston, and we're looking at the industrial base. And sort of the takeaway is that you have to have a purposeful set of strategies around workforce development, capital investment, integration with the national security apparatus, because it's almost impossible for anybody other than the major contractors to get integrated into the defense contracting process. So it's going to take a national strategy and effort to make that more resilient. Shockingly, the one name that didn't come up here today is Russia.
Yeah.
And yet, those of us in the military spent a lot of our time focused on the Soviet Union and Russia. So do you think a move on Ukraine is likely in the spring? How do you see Russia as a great power a competitor to us?
Okay, so again, I think what's important to consider is what are the emotions and ideology that drive and constrain adversaries. And of course, Putin he's in charge in Russia, right? And he's extended his rule, out till at least 2030, 2036 maybe, 2030, a long time, and who knows if he'll make it. I don't think he will. But I think with Putin's theory of victory to make Russia whole again, right, and to reinstate Novo Russia, is to drag everybody else down. China is competing with us, not head to head in sort of a sophisticated asymmetrical way, but China has the resources really to go head to head with us economically, as well as they're trying to build it militarily now with their nuclear arsenal. Russia is still a powerful nuclear power, but doesn't have the conventional force capability or the economic capability to compete with us. And so what Putin's theory of victory is to drag us all down so he's the last man standing, to do that by exacerbating the polarization in our societies and to reduce further the confidence in our democratic principles and institutions and processes. He does that through a sophisticated campaign of political subversion, disruption, disinformation, and then denial, implausible deniability, essentially, of what he's doing. And then he's also trying to coerce countries on the periphery.
So one more question, and then we'll finish on this. But I remember being at West Point and seeing guys our age and thinking those people are ancient. I mean, they're sort of they're much closer to the end than the beginning. And you and I both have a friend that. In Henry Kissinger, who's 98 now, and is as lucid as ever. Yeah. And you must be, you're about 60, right? You're close to 60.
A little bit, not yet.
Okay, 59. So, I'm trying to think, you're 3 years older than me.
59.
So, what's the next 20 years look like? Yeah. If President Nikki Haley called you, would you come back? Would you ever run for elected office? How do you want to make your mark? In the next 20 years? You've made such a great mark in the last 37 or whatever it is.
Well, gosh, I mean, I'm gonna ask you the same thing. I made a mission statement for myself, predictably, as I left the Army, and it was to contribute to a deeper understanding, a more full understanding of the international challenges and opportunities we face, as a way to help bring Americans together around more of a consensus position on foreign policy, and to help us understand better broadly how to build a better future for generations of Americans to come, right? So it's more of an education mission for myself. If I would have the opportunity to serve in an appointed position where I could make a difference, I think I would do it. I don't think I would run for office just because of the hell that is for people. But I really think we need our best people to run. So maybe it's kind of hypocritical of me, but I think you should run, for example. Or I think, I really do. I mean, I think we need leaders like you more than ever, Dave, especially those, I'm a foreign policy guy and a strategy and military history person, and I'm just now trying to learn more about the financial and economic world. I mean, you combine those in a way that I think very, very few people do. I mean, maybe you might be the only one I know. But anyway, so I'd like to ask you the same question. What do you think
I think it's we probably all feel this. You all feel lucky. Everybody in this room is lucky. Everybody in this room is in the 1% of something, and it's that's a real privilege, you know, to have been as fortunate as we are. And I do, when I sit and talk to and have conversations like this, and you see all the things that are wrong with the country, you know, the big fear I have is that 10 years from now, we'll all be a little grayer sitting in a room like this talking about all the things that are wrong with the country, and nobody will have done anything. And if the people in rooms like this don't do something, then I think so. I feel that you know, I feel that need for the people who have been most benefited from the country to do something. And so I know you've done, you know, we've all done something in our own way, but that was I hope we'll all keep thinking about it.
Well,
And,
I would serve as your deputy in whatever position, I'm sure.
and vice versa. Vice versa.
Well, I'd like to thank two gentlemen from the great state of Pennsylvania, right?
That's right, both of us.
Go Eagles.
Wow, whoa, that's the first thing we disagreed on. Go Steelers. I can't believe you said that.
Well, thank you, sir, and thank you, David,
Thank you.
for
My
being with us
pleasure.
tonight. Part 2 will be coming up sometime. We'll talk cybersecurity. We'll talk about, you know, the force of the Western civilization coming together. We'll talk about people like yourselves going out there, making a difference in your community, and we'll talk about service to each other and service to our fellow man, service to those that are less fortunate. So I'd like to say a round of applause for these gentlemen, and thank you so much. Please stay with us for we have an hour of cocktails and hors d'oeuvres, and we appreciate it. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Hugo said he's going to be